I wonder how James takes it as a priority question, or at least a question which someone would deal with it now. Everyone, of course, thinks about all the subjects which will be covered by the talks. Up to what point, what kind of progress has been made up to now? And we have so many other questions where there is actually an impasse. The question of the security, it will be sometime, it will come up in the agenda, and when they come up, all those questions will be dealt with. But hopefully, I would say, let us hope that we'll get to that point. And when we get to that bridge, then we'll see how to deal with it.
Very quickly, on the question of NATO, our discussions would lead one to believe that it's up to Cyprus to decide whether it can join NATO or not. As a very young student, as a schoolboy, in fact, at the time of the Lancaster House negotiations, discussions, I heard the rumor that Archbishop Macarius actually offered to join NATO, and it was rejected out of hand by Turkey and by Britain. I had this actually confirmed to me by two people who were part of those negotiations. I did ask the Archbishop himself, and he just smiled his enigmatic smile and said, let history be history. It is not the Cypriots who didn't want to join NATO at the time under Macarius. It was no way did Britain want NATO anywhere on the island because they did not want anybody coming into their bases. They were afraid and in fact, it was part of what Macarius said at the time, that perhaps you could have a Greek contingent and a Turkish contingent in the British bases. And the British had apoplexy at the time. And I don't think the situation has changed from that point of view. It is not up to the Cypriots whether they want to join. They made the best of it by being enthusiastic, non-aligned. And of course, with Agel today in the government, I don't think that they're likely to propose anything of the sort. But throughout history, it really has not been the Cypriots who have rejected NATO. It is NATO in the guise of Turkey and UK who have rejected the Cypriots.
Thank you, Kostas. I see Nikki.
I just want to add one word to what Kostas has said. I think it's a false dilemma right now to discuss NATO, because I don't think it's Cyprus that generates a problem about NATO. It's the Turkish veto that really forbids us from even thinking about it. And not only that, I think that the NATO countries have a stronghold in Cyprus, and they don't need really to have any more. What I am afraid of is that we leave out the whole thing and the whole Cold War, which may be going on subterraneously with Russia. And Cyprus is in a strategic place like that. And I think demilitarization is something that shouldn't be discussed lightheartedly, that we should take into consideration without being demilitarized and part of NATO. Just demilitarized will do. Anyway, women's movement will be for peace and against armies in Cyprus.
Thank you. I will take the last question from Maria.
It's more directed to Nicholas and yourself. It's just a brief point. So I was wondering if we could do more as a community to help inform our own community here of how to deal with things in Cyprus, for example, if they're buying a flat or if they're dealing with an inheritance. Because there are structures, for example, Citizens Charter on the DLO websites and things, but people don't always know this. And especially at the Lobby for Cyprus meeting, I felt a lot of defeatism. Oh, you can't do anything in Cyprus, there is the MESA. There are structures there, and I just feel as a community, could we be doing more to inform people of how to use the structures in place and possibly work to improve them yet further, so that you don't have this sort of defeatist approach from immigrants, second and third generations, that, well, whatever happens in Cyprus, it's all mafia, you can do nothing. I think as a community, could we possibly be pushing more to help people, to help themselves and deal with Cyprus structures?
Thank you, Maria. James,
yeah, I know time is pressing on. I think on the first comment about feelings of people, this has obviously got to be paramount. One of the problems that we saw in 2004 with the ways the process, I mean, I have my particular views on the Annan plan, but I can readily accept that the process was deeply flawed, and I think that this is something that's been taken on very clearly by the UN this time round. They've understood that. They've tried to make this essentially a Cypriot-led process. And I think it is tremendously important when we get onto questions of security, but we've also got to remember that when we talk about security, I mean, again, we're trying to weigh up the problems that the two communities have fundamentally different approaches to this. And we've seen in recent months that there's been this zero-sum approach to it. You've had the Greek Cypriots saying, look, we cannot possibly have any sort of guarantees. You've then had a Turkish Cypriot response saying, we must have a guarantee. And I think that the question we really need to be considering is how do we unpick this to try and provide a way that both sides, both communities can feel that their fundamental security is taken care of without feeling a threat. So Turkish Cypriots don't need to feel threatened by Greek Cypriots. Greek Cypriots don't need to live under the threat of a major, large Turkish army sitting just 40 miles to the north. On the question of NATO and Cyprus to decide, I mean, it's quite clearly, you know, there's all sorts of debate about who's rejected it, and, you know, the historical record, Clerides has said quite clearly for the Greek Cypriot side that this was a reason why Makarios didn't want Cyprus to join NATO. I remember I interviewed Osman Orek, who was, many people would know, was actually the first Minister of Defence of Cyprus after independence, and he recounted a story to me of Küçük going and trying to persuade Ankara that, look, we should join NATO, and Ankara saying in absolute certain terms, no, leave this aside, let the Greek Cypriots have their wish on this. We don't want Cyprus to join NATO because it will make it that much more difficult for us to intervene. In 1963-64, there was, of course, a very strong British push for the establishment of a NATO peacekeeping force in Cyprus. This was actually the preferred option of the British government and Washington, and it was actually very, very heavily opposed by President Makarios. It was. The British plan was to try and have a NATO-based peacekeeping force established in Cyprus. Yes, peacekeeping force. No, it wasn't established. I'll go into all sorts of details as to how I can be absolutely sure that this was Britain's intention in 1963-60. I spent 3 years writing a PhD thesis on this exact subject, but it was actually very strongly rejected by President Makarios, who actually managed to enlist Russian help to ensure that the plan was defeated, and that then forced Britain to take it to the Security Council, and that's why we now have a UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus. So I would say that, you know, it's a very, very complex relationship that Cyprus has had with NATO, and as I say, very, very much agnostic on this. Final point is on Russian element and on security. Of course, we have to take this into account, and I think that this is very important. Any solution to Cyprus is going to have to get past the Security Council, and we need to make sure that Russia is fully on board, fully signed up to whatever agreement that is. Hopefully, at the same time, Moscow will recognise its responsibility, as well as everyone else recognising. So, you know, everyone's, I think, going to have to make some movement and come up with some sort of solution, which essentially is going to guarantee whatever settlement is put in place.